Hello, and welcome to the 8th and most likely last episode of Full Court Press. Stop it. My name is Chris Murphy, and to my right is Colton Poole.
Hello.
Or as nobody calls him, CP0. We are Forum Sports reporters, and we are going to talk about sports. But before we get into North Dakota football, I just wanted to reiterate one more thing about Minnesota football.
Here we go.
Is the the number 1 seeds in sections versus 8th seeds in sections. The top seeds went 14-0, and they averaged wins by 52 to 11.46 against 8 seeds. So Minnesota, once again, you do not need to have everybody make the playoffs. It is not great. And I'm sure those 8 seeds really appreciated driving like an hour and a half to get destroyed.
This articulation is brought to you by Chris Murphy.
Thank you. That was my rant. Okay. Now we'll go into North Dakota football, where Colton, on his picks last week, went 10 for 14.
I'm pretty proud of that.
You shouldn't be.
All right.
You got Velva, Minot, and both Class 2A games wrong. Wow, way to go.
I know.
And, we'll start with North Dakota football. Colton, explain.
So first we'll start with North Dakota 9-man. We're down to the semifinals in all of these classes now with the big Dakota Bowl coming up next week. But for now, we're in the semifinals. So 9-man, Region 5, number 2 seed Bismarck Shiloh Christian is at Region 5, number 1 New Salem Glen Ullin. It's not super often that you get 2 teams from the same region going against each other. So in that game, let's see, New Salem, who's number 2 in the QRF as a whole, they beat Shiloh Christian earlier in the season to even get that 1 seed. And yeah, I mean, it's tough in these sorts of games. Teams who have played each other, and it was a close game as well. I believe Shiloh Christian lost by 2 to decide who's going to win here. But both really good teams. This is at New Salem. And New Salem, by the way, they beat North Prairie 38-18. Shiloh Christian beating Beach 49-26. So both of these teams are looking pretty good right now. But in the end, I'll take Shiloh Christian scores 45.1 points per game and allows 18.7, while New Salem scores 37.6 and allows 15.6. I'll take the better defense, and New Salem wins again, 28-25.
Wonderful. All right, in Region 1, you got Wyndmere Lidgerwood and Cavalier.
So Wyndmere Lidgerwood is the number 1 seed out of Region 1, Cavalier being the Region 2 number 1 seed. Last week I picked Cavalier 38-34, and they barely won on a last-second comeback touchdown. They were down at 10 at half and scored 14 in the fourth quarter. Austin Erlob led Cavalier with 16 carries for 140 yards, and Tristan Sott scored 3 total touchdowns. Erlob also went 14 of 22 for 207 yards and 4 touchdowns in that game. And that was against...
Do your research, Colton.
That was against Napoleon Gackle Street Earth. They won. The Cavalier won 36-34. So Cavalier barely escaping there. They were number 1 in the QRF. Well, Wyndmere is number 3. And Wyndmere, I was at that Wyndmere Lidgerwood game in which they beat Mayport CG. And the Warbirds, awesome name, looked as well as they could have. They scored, I think it was 2 touchdowns in their first 5 plays from scrimmage. Luke Forch finished the game with 6 carries for 123 yards to go with 2 catches and 55 yards. Andres Vasquez finished with 5 catches for 54 yards and an interception. Wyatt Harless finished the game a perfect 9 for 9 passing for 128 yards and a touchdown to go with a rushing touchdown.
Did you notice that whenever I see Wyndmere Lidgerwood, I feel like they're just bigger than everybody on the field?
They are.
Yeah, they just look bigger.
I mean, but Cavalier's got some
right. No,
big
I
kids
wouldn't.
Too.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
But Wyndmere, their offense looked so just just in sync, just pacing down. They knew where everyone was going to be, as well as the defensive end as well, to hold Mayport to, I think, just one touchdown. Both ends of the ball are working really well for them. And Furch had a kickoff return for a touchdown on the opening half, or the opening second half. Second half.
Words are hard.
Opening kickoff. You turned it 90 yards. But, yeah, Wyndmere looks so good right now, and they're allowing less than 3 points per game. I'll take Wyndmere over Cavalier in a shootout, 48-43.
Okay, well, what happened in 1A playoffs?
So, the first game I want to talk about is going to be a total defensive slobber knocker, if that's a word.
Slobber knocker is a word, I think.
Yeah, so first, Hillsborough Central Valley, they're the number 1 seed in the 1A playoffs. They beat Carrington 27-7 at home in the quarterfinals, and they host number 4 Dickinson Trinity, which beat Delax Burlington at home in the quarterfinals 40-0. So this is going to be a defensive game because Hillsborough allows 5.3 points per game.
That's insane.
And scores 39.7. Trinity allows 2.6 points per game.
That's way more insane.
And have allowed, I think, 1 touchdown since their opening game. I still don't like the fact that they lost to Bowman County in the very first game of the season. That Bowman, who didn't even make the playoffs and aren't a powerhouse at all. Trinity, that was such a weird game, but I question Trinity's ability to keep consistent, especially down now where it's in the nitty-gritty semifinals of the playoffs. Hillsborough is number 1 in the QRF and have shut out 4 teams in an undefeated season. Trinity is 4th in the QRF, and let's see, Grant Skagers torched Carrington's defense in that quarterfinal game for 244 yards and 4 touchdowns, and the defense held Carrington to 142 total yards. While in Trinity's win, Delax's leading rusher had 14 yards. And Trinity was led by Eric Knopik, who went 10 of 15 for 3 touchdowns for 148 yards passing. Nathaniel Gillick had 20 carries for 80 yards, while Eric Knopik scored 2 touchdowns. I'll still take Hillsborough in a really close defensive game. I think Hillsborough has enough firepower to score a couple touchdowns on Trinity. Winning like Bowman did in that first game against Trinity, I'll take Hillsborough 14-8.
Lovely. What do you got for Langdon and Velva?
So the Velva game was the one upset, or the one pick that I got wrong. I picked Velva to lose in an upset, and it was about the same right score for Velva. I picked Velva to lose 22-21, but Velva went on to shut out Beulah. So their defense is really on a roll. And then I picked Langdon Area Munich to beat the defending champs Ellendale. Just looking at the scores here, Velva beat Beulah, like I said, 22-0, and Langdon beat Ellendale 35-14. So both of these defenses are looking really good. Velva is tied for number 1 in the QRF and has only allowed 4 touchdowns in the regular season. In that game against Beulah, Nicholas Efforts had 2 touchdown passes, and Hayden Lee and Hunter Brandt both had a touchdown catch, and Elijah Hackman had a touchdown run.
Did Langdon held Clayton Grunich to no touchdowns? Is that right?
Yeah, that is right.
Wow.
Clayton Grunich, he had 102 yards on 25 carries in that game.
Which is really solid, but for him, that's...
But really impressive to keep him out of the end zone.
Yeah.
Ellendale in that impressive performance for Langdon, they were led by Jacob Delvo, who had 29 carries for 91 yards, and Connor Tetrault had 4 total touchdowns. This year, Velva is scoring 42.8 points per game and allowing 3.3 points per game. Langdon is scoring 44.5 points per game and allowing 5.8. Unfortunately, I'm not going to pick against Velva again, and against home field advantage and a really dominant defense. I'll take Velva 14-8, which sets up Velva and Hillsborough in the state championship game.
Okay, noted. What happened in Class 2A?
So this was the one I got both of the Class 2A picks wrong. I picked one upset in one of them and not in another, and it was the other way around. So Devils Lake, they went on to beat Wahpeton 43-28, and now play at Bismarck St. Mary's. Devils Lake, they lost 6-3 to St. Mary's and to Shanley in the regular season. In that win for Devils Lake, Aaron Dykey had 12 carries for 48 yards and a touchdown. Oh, excuse me, that was Wahpeton. Devils Lake was led by Joey Hornstein, who had 34 carries for 220 yards and a touchdown and 3 catches for 66 yards. But this season, with a bye week, by the way, St. Mary's, being the number 2 seed in the playoffs, didn't have to play last week, so they had a week of rest and a week of preparation. They scored 33.3 points per game and allowed only 9.4. Their only losses are to Shanley and at Watford City in a weird game. Devils Lake lost to St. Mary's in the regular season, 35-0 at home. I'll take St. Mary's 24-8 in a little bit closer game this time around.
What do you got for Fargo Shanley and Watford City?
Number 5 seed Watford City. They beat Jamestown at Jamestown in a really weird game. Watford City's Elijah Brown scored an 18-yard touchdown pass from Hunter Schwarzenberger in the final 2 minutes. And Jamestown only managed a field goal. Watford City won 6-3. So weird game there, and impressive for Watford City to survive such a weird game. Watford City, by the way, they started their season on a 3-game losing skid and are now on a 7-game winning streak. But Shanley, they're 9-0 this season. They've scored 35.8 points per game and allowed 7. They beat Watford City 25-0 at Watford City on September 8th. I'll take Shanley again with Shanley, by the way, number 1 seed in the playoffs. Also have a week of preparation, a week of rest. I'll take Shanley 28-14.
How many touchdowns does Joe Keller score? Shanley superfan.
All of them.
Okay, fair enough. All right, and we move to Class 3A where you got Minot and Bismarck Century.
So Minot was the pick I got wrong, and that was a total shootout for Minot to score 66 points on West Fargo Cheyenne in the quarterfinals. Minot won 66-37. I totally thought it was going to be a defensive-dominated, slow-pace game. I think this is the first time second time that Cheyenne has even scored this many points, 37, and to allow 66 is just uncanny. So Minot's offense is really on a roll, but and Bismarck Century, by the way, they almost lost to East Region number 4 seed Fargo Davies.
It's true.
Yeah. So Austin Underhill kicked a 37-yard field goal as time expired to even advance Century into the semifinals. 2-time defending state champs. But if you're looking at the stats of that game, Century dominated in a lot of different ways. Century had 23 first downs to Davies 8, had 209 rushing yards to Davies 161, had more passing yards, had more total yards. What really killed Century and put Davies in the position to even try to win was Century commit 3 turnovers while Davies had none. In that game, Century held Jesse Forknell to 8 carries for 1 yard. Johnson Jones had 6 carries for 59 yards and a touchdown for Davies. But Jacob Olson, he had 18 carries for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns and threw the ball 28 times and completed 17 passes for 164 yards. Nathan Kraft also had a touchdown in that game. Jacob Olson, by the way, he leads Century with 1,208 yards on 14 touchdowns through the air and only 3 picks. So this was a really uncanny game for Jacob Olson. Nathan Kraft leads the Patriots with 609 yards on 133 carries and 10 total touchdowns. Century's only loss of the year is 16-14 to Cheyenne. Was at that game. Weird game for the Patriots, really uncharacteristic. So I don't put a lot of stock into that one. Minot is led by Brett Davis, he has 496 yards on 97 carries. And the dynamic duo of Creighton Rudolph and Peyton Lamoureux. Rudolph has 1,701 yards on 93 of 147 passing and 16 touchdowns, while Peyton Lamoureux has 44 catches for 867 yards.
It's caught nearly 50% of his passes.
Right. So that's Lamoureux is really the guy that they go to, and I don't doubt that Minot can score a couple touchdowns on this Century defense. But in the regular season, Century won 38-7 in the regular season, and Century, two-time defending champs, they have experience in these sorts of games. As does Minot. They got to the state championship, if I'm not mistaken, last year. But I'll take Century with 34-14.
Okay, and last but not least, Bismarck and West Fargo.
West Fargo's offense is on an absolute tear. I was at that game in the quarterfinals when West Fargo beat Bismarck Legacy 49-7, and West Fargo's offense just could not be stopped. I don't think they punted in the first half.
Well, they got quarterbacks throwing blocks too.
Oh yeah, there was the Jared Franick. He kind of reversed field, and Andy Gravdahl, their quarterback, West Fargo's quarterback, threw a great block on a Legacy defender. And just kind of shows you that, any of these guys can do a lot of different things. I wrote a piece for the West Fargo Pioneer about West Fargo's offense, and they're so different this year because West Fargo, traditional powerhouse in the East region, they're the number 1 seed and undefeated this year. They're passing a lot more this year, and going into the regular season, Gravdahl was completing 116 of 186 passes for a 62.4 completion percentage and 1,773 yards and 7 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. He's West Fargo's all-time passing leader. And they're going to Joe Pastorius a lot, who had 31 catches for 688 yards and 5 touchdowns going into the playoffs. And that's just another dimension to their offense, which allows they're kind of passing to set up the run this year. And this year, Jared Franick has 409 yards on 62 carries and 14 touchdowns, while Alex Sell has 61 carries for 624 yards and 12 touchdowns. And Jared Franick in the Legacy game, he had 71 rushing yards on 7 carries and 2 touchdowns, and Sell had 45 yards on 5 carries and a touchdown. Just really efficient offensively, and it's really tough for me to picture them being stopped this year. Bismarck, they beat Fargo South to move on to the semifinals. They beat South 42-15 in the quarterfinals. This year, the Demons are led by Jalen Sprecher, who has 1,282 yards on 166 carries and 20 total touchdowns, while Will Madler has 1,462 yards and 12 touchdowns through the air on 93 of 128 passing. Their only losses this year are to Century, the number 1 seed in the West, and West Fargo, the number 1 seed out of the East region.
Big losses, too.
Right, and big losses. We'll get to that in a second. In that South game, by the way, Sprecher had 13 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown, while Isaiah Olsen had 3 total touchdowns. Madler also had a passing touchdown. Bismarck outscores opponents 274-133 this year, but West Fargo outscores teams 400-12-82. I think the Demons have enough. So in the regular season, it was West Fargo's home opener. West Fargo beat Bismarck 41-0. Defensive shutout didn't allow it. They made Bismarck look like a completely different team in that game, and West Fargo's offense was cruising on all cylinders as it has been. And West Fargo at home again. West Fargo has been in the semifinals the past 2 years and have kind of I don't want to say choked, but like they were expected to win and they lose in heartbreaking ways. So it's going to be a little bit of a mental hump, if you will, to get over. But I think West Fargo has enough offense to do it. I think West Fargo wins 42-14 and really find their groove in the second quarter.
All right, that's football.
And so now kind of shifting gears here a little bit, we move on to Minnesota State cross country. Murphy, why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
I just have a real quick thing to say about Minnesota State cross country, which is this Saturday at St. Olaf College. Perham, of course, is the story, as they generally are. They head in ranked number 1 in both Class 1A boys and girls. This is the 16th straight year the Yellow Jacket boys have gone to state, and it's the 15th for girls. So, yeah, we're going to watch closely on them and see if they can do a duo championship.
And, all right, I think that covered quite a bit there. This has been Full Court Press. I'm Colton Poole, along with Chris Murphy. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.